Is. And welcome. You are listening to Watching the Financial Survival Network. I'm Kerry Lutz. Today, it's January 24th, 2022. Well, it looks like the taper tantrum is turning into a market meltdown. How can this be? I thought that stocks always went up. Well, here to discuss is our good friend John Rubino, dollarcollapse.com. So, John, how can the market be going down? It only goes up.
Hey, Kerry. Oh, no, we're back in a taper tantrum now. Is this feeling a little repetitious to you? Because the script is followed so perfectly over and over again. It just feels like people should understand it and front run it a little better. But basically, the Fed once again announced that it was getting ready to taper, and maybe it was even going to raise interest rates. And the financial markets are tanking. Cryptos got crushed and stocks are being smashed as we speak right now. We'll probably still be talking towards the market close on Monday. So we'll be able to talk about almost where it closes and everything. But right now, stocks are down big. And then the Fed meets next week, which means in this environment of crashing stocks and financial turmoil in general, they have to raise interest rates. So 2 weeks ago, the thinking was that they would go shock and awe. They would do like a 50 basis point increase, in other words, 0.5% on the Fed funds rate. And now there's speculation that they're not even going to raise rates. They don't know what to do. They're just completely at the mercy of market forces, which they have unleashed and which they have no idea how to control. So next week, if the Fed goes shock and awe, raises rates more than expected, the financial markets will collapse. If they don't, and do what's expected, a quarter point rise or something like that, then stocks will probably still go down. And if they don't raise rates at all, then you're going to get turmoil in the other direction. Everybody's going to be like, wait, isn't inflation 6% and you're not raising interest rates? What did that mean? And then I would expect gold and silver to go through the roof. It's unlikely that they don't raise rates just because they have so much momentum built into the whole we're raising rates thing. But suffice it to say that whatever they do, it's liable to be dramatically wrong. And the results in the market are liable to illustrate that. With people panicking in one direction or the other, this might be the box that the Fed finally can't get out of after all these years. It really should have happened in 2000 with the tech stock bubble bursting. It definitely should have happened in 2007 when the housing bubble burst. And now maybe people are starting to recognize that there's no way to fix this much debt. You only just have to have your crisis one way or another. And the Fed is now in the position of choosing which crisis that we're going to have. Not an enviable place, but it's what they deserve. These guys brought this on. They're the arsonists who set the fire. It's nice to think from a justice standpoint that they're going to be unable to put the fire out this time around.
Hey, well, they're the arsonists that set the fire, and they also happen to be the fire chief. So where does that leave us here? Every time they've threatened to raise rates and when they started 2019, the market goes into a conniption. And there's no way they can stop printing money. There just is no possible way to not print money because the deficits are so large and they can't sell enough treasuries unless they're buying them. So what do? That's really the question. Is there anything they can do? And I guess so much for so goes January, so goes the market, right?
No, it could well be. So goes January, so goes the market. But the Fed, what they hope to do is to find some middle ground where they can just tighten enough to put inflation on a downward trend without tanking the financial markets. It's highly unlikely that there's a mix of monetary policies that do that. And if there is a mix, it's got to be so precise and so unknowable ahead of time that the only way you get that mix of policies is by pure chance. So next week is going to be a fascinating week because there could just be absolute fireworks. And we can't know ahead of time whether the biggest fireworks are for no rate increase or a big rate increase or, middling rate. We just can't know. And they can't know. That's the important thing. The Fed has no idea what the market's reaction to their announcements are going to be. Therefore, they have no idea what to announce. If you were Jerome Powell, would you a minute of sleep between now and then? I don't think I would. I think I'd be too stressed out. I'd be eating Ambien like it's Halloween candy, just trying to get a few hours of sleep because you're at the center of the world. 7 billion people are going to be watching on, is it Tuesday or Wednesday that they make their announcement of next week? Whichever day it is. 7 billion people are going to be tuning in, and it's almost a lock that you're going to be wrong in some way, and that the whole world is going to be in turmoil after you say the words you're going to say. Yeah, it's going to. All I can say is it's about time. We should have been there long ago, and we're finally reaching that point now. And the sooner we get this over with, the better, because it's only going to get worse. The more debt we take on from here on out, the worse the consequences of our overborrowing will be. So let's just take it now. Let's just take the pain, get it over with, do the monetary reset, reprice stocks to 70% below their current prices, reprice bonds to 80% below their current prices, and then get on with things.
Yeah, eventually, we always said they're kicking the can down the road, and it's going to reach a point where they can't kick the can down the road anymore. And yet that day never seemed to come. But it certainly would appear we're here. Just remember, there are those conspiracy theorists among us who believe that what governments do when they run out of all other options is armed conflict. Could that possibly happen, John?
Not in this world,
China,
Yeah.
Ukraine, Russia. So then you can implement emergency measures. And as long as the war goes on, hey, we had a war against terror. I think that war's still going on, John. And who knows how many more wars they can start that'll never end.
Kerry, you're being really pessimistic. Don't you feel like we've grown emotionally to the point where war has basically been made obsolete because we're so evolved? That, I don't know. I would like to think that personally.
I'd like to think it, even though I don't believe it's true.
No, actually, that's the wild card even more than the Fed right now, is that if we get into a shooting war with Russia, Jesus, what will that do to the market? Not that the financial market should be our main concern if we get into a shooting war with Russia, but speaking just financially, okay, just for all of our investments, oh my God. Because even if we just put sanctions on Russia, they're a big oil producer. What does that mean for the oil market? It probably means $100 oil, easy.
And palladium. Don't forget about palladium, every catalytic converter. And maybe that's their plan. I don't know. John, I don't know that war is going to start with Ukraine. I tend to think it probably isn't because nobody in the country, there was some survey done. I don't know if you caught it. Like 87% of everybody surveyed is against us getting involved in a war in the Ukraine.
I've said a few times, just as a joke, that ask 1,000 Americans where Ukraine is on a map, and maybe one of them will know. And they're like Ukrainian, they have Ukrainian ancestors or something like that. But the other day, I had to go back and look it up again because I knew where Ukraine used to be, and I forgot where it was and had to go look it up. Nobody knows anything about Ukraine in the US. We don't know much about, ask us about Canada. We don't know much of anything about Canada. And the Ukraine is just this, it's like Mexico is to the US, to Russia. It's right next to their border. It's right there. And
it's a total Russian backwater.
Yeah, there's a Russian military base, a Russian naval base in the Ukraine, which is very important to Russia. And so the idea that we could fold the Ukraine into NATO and have it be sitting right there on Russia's border and Russia wouldn't do anything about it is ludicrous. This is completely our fault. This fight is from beginning to end, started by the US and pushed by the US. And whatever happens, it's hard to vote for us in this. I would never want to vote against our country in any kind of a conflict out there, but boy, you really have to hold your nose to hope the US comes out of this victorious in one way or another.
It's a total mistake. It's a blunder. Here it is, Newsweek. This is not exactly one of your conservative stalwart publications, John. Fewer than 1 in 6 Americans want U.S. soldiers deployed to defend Ukraine, but there's some kind of laundromat taking place there, international aid from the U.S. and other countries, and it goes into Ukraine into a black box, and it gets fed back to our U.S. politicians, evidently. This is what the whole election lead-up scandal was, with whose son, dumb son number 2 of the president, and this is why they don't want it. Like, These guys are not thinking clearly. Cryptocurrencies are the way forward for modern political graft and corruption because they're so efficient and they can be done instantly, and it's really hard to track them, even for people that track them, and not that anybody really cares. So, like, why are we bothering with this old fashioned way of laundering money? Our politicians got to modernize here because it's really hurting the country.
Yeah, a suitcase full of $100 bills does seem anachronistic now, doesn't it? It just it doesn't seem like the way you would do it anymore.
Remember that?
But
Remember the guy in New Orleans when the Hurricane Katrina hit? He was a congressman and he went back in a helicopter to take 60 or $80,000 cash out of his freezer. Remember that one? It was a huge scandal. Eventually, they indicted him or he resigned or something.
is
Check.
that where the term cold cash comes from?
That's what the way his interpretation of it, John,
Hmm.
was all cash belongs in the freezer. Nobody's ever going to think there because the first thing burglar does is burglarize the master bedroom. The last place they look for anything is the kitchen. So there's actually some logic to it. But point, the Ukraine has no strategic importance to the U.S. now that Russia seized Crimea. It has zero importance to us, none. But maybe Russia is trying to shore up food supplies because a lot of their food comes from Ukraine. And that's one theory about it.
Well, Kerry, what Russia just doesn't want an enemy country sitting right on its border. It would be like if Mexico or Canada joined an anti-US military organization. We wouldn't put up with that.
No.
And who is not a good person. We don't like him at all, and he does all kinds of bad things, but he's justified in his attitude right now about the Ukraine. And why in this world, with all the stuff we have on our plate, are we doing this? Why are we risking something this horrendous? Same thing with Taiwan. The idea that we would fight a nuclear war over Taiwan, I sympathize with the people there. They don't want to be part of a dictatorship. Understandable, but not our fight. And for us to risk a two-front war against separate nuclear powers over these pieces of land and these groups of people that we have really no strategic need to save is just terrifying. And this is personal for me, as I've repeated a few times on your show. I've got sons who are of an age where they could get sucked into something like this, and that terrifies me. And even if I wasn't already anti-interventionist, I am definitely that way now, just for personal reasons. So don't send our kids over there to die for these things that 30 years from now nobody is going to care about or even remember.
Yeah, and hey, if you're going to send them over there, at least get them better men. You don't want them getting you know what when they're on the front lines. Now, like China, there's an argument because if we don't stop them at some point, there will be no stopping them. And no, I'm not interventionist, but this is the reality here. But, John, I want to cover one other thing. A couple of weeks ago, China put out a warning to the West saying, don't increase interest rates or else. And of course, it seems to have fallen on deaf ears. At the same time, that was the same day, China started cutting their rates. Maybe there's a strategic aspect of this rate increase that we haven't really looked at before.
Yeah, that's one of the really interesting things about what's going on out there monetarily. The second biggest country is easing while all the other major countries are either tightening or planning to tighten at some point. And China has a gigantic real estate bust going on that Evergrande is in the press and everything, but it's not getting the attention that it really deserves because it's a big deal. China steered a huge amount of household wealth into real estate. And now real estate is imploding. So they've got that to worry about. The whole Taiwan thing, it could go either way. If you've got a big crisis, do you really want an international crisis to go along with your domestic crisis? Or do you definitely want an international crisis to distract people from your domestic crisis? It's hard to know ahead of time how all these pieces fit together. But yeah, China, first of all, China didn't cut their interest rates into negative territory like most of the developed world. I think their short-term rates were 6% until recently, and now they're lowering them somewhat. So they had more normal monetary policy than a lot of the rest of the world. But they're responding to a domestic financial problem that could be called a crisis. We'll see how many real estate developers start to default here. And from their point of view, it makes sense that they would be cutting interest rates and otherwise easing. The rest of us are tightening, so we'll see what that does. Normally, you would think that would cause a difference in the trend in currency exchange rates. In other words, the Chinese currency goes down in value versus the dollar, let's say. We'll see if that happens. So that's a currency war thing, which we haven't heard much about lately, but using your currency in trade competition with other countries is something that's a fairly common thing. And if the yuan drops dramatically in value, that gives them a big trade advantage. So that's another thing. It's a complicated world out there, Kerry. And I have a lot of trouble figuring out how all these moving parts fit together.
It gives them a trade advantage. However, I think there's a bigger picture here. A lot of their bonds are denominated in dollars. All right, that makes them less serviceable. And if the yuan crashes, that's going to shoot inflation through the roof there, okay, in terms of all their imports getting dramatically higher. This could be an opening salvo in a currency war, is all I'm saying. And while everyone's looking at the hot wars, they're not paying attention to the financial wars, the money wars taking place.
Now, to take it one step further, is this a prelude to them giving their currency gold backing and going to a digital yuan backed by gold at some point as a new world reserve currency? Or at least a currency that doesn't have to worry about anybody else. You don't care about exchange rates if you're gold backed. So yeah, this is just a fascinating time. Yeah.
That requires an abdication of central planning power by the central banks to actually put your currency on a legitimate gold standard. Means interest rate cuts don't really matter anymore, because in theory, at least, if you're not printing money, if it's fixed money supply, all that's going to be determined by the free market. Wouldn't that be amazing? China becoming the bastion of free market.
Yeah. So basically, you've got all this stuff in the mix. Some of them are contradictory. Some of them are mutually exclusive. But they're all kind of possibilities out there in the next couple of years. And anybody who says, well, I know exactly how this is going to go, is delusional, I'm afraid. I don't think the human mind is capable of modeling the current global financial and geopolitical system. Too many moving parts.
I tend to agree with you. Hey, so on a comical note, there's an article written by a guy from Canada. A Canadian who health issue Hysteric goes to Florida, and absolute hilarity ensues. And I encountered this recently, the same type of thing, but this guy went to vacation in Florida because he needed a break from all the totalitarian machinations of our neighbor to the north, and he was abhorrent what he saw, that how dare these people not wear any masks, and the fact that Quebec is in full confinement mode, Florida is cowboy land where you barely know COVID is happening, despite much higher new case and hospitalization rates than ours. This is what he said. It's lunacy by Canadian standards, but an eye-opening experience. For starters, everyone's out and about filling bars, restaurants, movies, gyms, and jam-packed sports arenas.
Oh my God. It's a hellscape. Yeah.
He said that he had to escape his current situation in Quebec, which is rife with curfews and other tyrannical mitigation measures. It felt like we'd arrived on another planet. And yeah, could you imagine people going out to eat, going to the gym? John, this is just, we can't allow that.
It's funny. COVID turned out to be the best. I'm sorry, Kerry. Yeah, edit that out. Okay. The recent health scare turned out to be the best thing for Florida tourism in decades. As a moneymaker for those guys.
Listen to this. He said, it's easy to spot Canadians at restaurants as we're the only ones properly masked and nervously sitting on the terrace, even in the rain. It's just like, what are these people thinking?
And then you got all these politicians who are going down there just to live without mask mandates for a while and getting caught. Yeah. People take pictures of them, and AOC or whoever is in trouble because of it.
Yes, and he said, in Florida, entire conversations happen without the C word mentioned unless you bring it up, which, of course, I did. I asked a group of 760-somethings I met at a restaurant terrace how they felt about Florida's non existent pandemic rules, which isn't true. We do have them. Every last one said they loved how Florida handles things. In the words of one woman, our philosophy here is I look after myself and you look after yourself. If you want to wear a mask indoors, you should. If you don't want to go to a restaurant, you shouldn't. When I then asked about our collective responsibility to protect others, she shrugged and said, that's just not how we think here.
So American in the old sense. That's how we used to think. And
Yeah.
it's nice that there's still some of that left. Yeah.
It says, I mentioned Quebec's recent curfew, but they all just laughed, dismissing it as Canadian communism. Oh my God. It's like you gotta read this article. We'll put a link to it because it's not intended to be comedy, the article, but maybe sometimes when you don't attempt to do comedy and you're so unself-aware, you wind up becoming a master of the art accidentally, if you will. Hey, John, I don't know if you caught this recent survey, but I think it's significant from NBC, no less, saying dark outlook, dismal NBC poll reveals most Americans think country going downhill and is lost. Who would think such a thing?
For instance, the gold bugs and the libertarians have thought that for quite a while. And now you're seeing political independents and liberals start to come to the same conclusion. It's very interesting. I've got a lot of liberal friends who, for the first time ever, are asking me how to buy silver. And that too, they're suddenly realizing that this world is heading in a really dangerous direction. And what it was for them, I think, was Trump came along and just completely upended all their assumptions. And then before he was even gone, this pandemic hit, which was absolutely, for some reason, way more terrifying for liberals than for conservatives. That's a whole show, doing the psychoanalysis of those two mental approaches. But so it's been 5 years and some living in abject terror for a lot of these guys. And I think it's starting to break. So yeah, you've got most of the country now accepting that we're going in the wrong direction. At the same time, you've got inflation picking up, the Fed trying to raise interest rates and crashing the financial markets, the US and China and Russia out there picking fights with each other. I agree. We may be lost. And if a political majority comes to that conclusion, then all of a sudden our domestic politics gets even crazier. So we'll have to see what's the platform you run on. If 60% of the people think the country is lost, we'll find out, I think, next time around.
I think so. There was an article, I saw it in a bunch of places, but Zero Hedge had it like a week or two ago. And that is that Beverly Hills residents are flocking to the city's only gun store to arm up. And at the same time, doesn't it sound like efforts at gun control are dead here?
You do not hear very much about gun control anymore because people across the political spectrum are arming themselves to the teeth. That's a trend that's been going on since the Obama year, when gun sales just went through the roof, and it never really moderated. So we're gearing up for, I don't know if people are consciously thinking that they're buying their guns because civil war is coming. But we looked at from a slight distance, it does look like the US is gearing up for some kind of civil war. And God, that brings us to the whole secession thing, which I sincerely hope doesn't become a big issue here, but that could be too. A lot of people right now are voting with their feet. They're moving out of one state and into another state because they disagree with their home state's politics. And right now it's blue. It's not clear how far that goes or what it leads to, but it could easily lead to a place where people just throw up their hands and say, look, let's just divide the country in two. So we don't have to constantly be moving from state to state. We'll just do that one big shift like India did after World War II, after independence, where all the Hindus, India, and all the Muslims go to Pakistan, and that's it. So it could be that's the cleanest solution at some point. We just spend a decade just sorting ourselves into two groups, and then shaking hands and breaking up.
Because the Midwest kind of swings both ways, but the South is one. So you got both coasts. So you have these. I read this article by some Russian guy said U.S. was going to split up to 4 or 5 different countries. And as we proceed, more and more likely, but nobody from red states is moving to blue states. So that should tell you something right there. Now, I just want to, in the blue states, they're all very anti-gun. There was in World War II called the FP-45 Liberator. And basically what the Allies did was create this throwaway gun. It was a 45, really cheaply made, and dumped it in occupied areas so that the people there could rise up and shoot the German officers and all that. I don't know why I'm raising this point, but as guns become rarer in blue states, maybe that's going to happen here. Maybe all the gun manufacturers are moving from blue states to red if they haven't already.
Yeah, it is disproportionate. One side is arming itself better than the other side, but it's unlikely that it would come to an actual shooting civil war when we have freedom of. So it could be that this just continues. But you're right about the two coasts having this dilemma because they can't form one country if they've got 2,500 miles of another country in between them. So it would have to be multiple countries.
2,500 hostile.
Yeah.
New York, like you go up from Maine down to Maryland, maybe not Virginia anymore. And then you go, maybe you could get Pennsylvania, although you'd have to split Pennsylvania up because central Pennsylvania doesn't want any part of it, but the two major cities do. It's a logistical nightmare, but then again, like countries have split up and reassembled. Maybe we'll just have it'll be like Yugoslavia. Yugoslavia is 4 or 5 countries now.
Yugoslavia was only one country because it was a dictator. As soon as the dictatorship ended, each country went back to its own national sovereignty. And I guess that's one way we could do it. I hope not, though. But
every state will be its own sovereign. There won't be a central government or a weak one only there for defense. We go back to the Articles of Confederation, John.
That would be the most peaceful possible solution. We'll see. The idea that we're talking about this stuff as a legitimate possibility, though, illustrates how far gone we are as a society. That polling data saying that a lot of people think the country is quote unquote gone or lost, lost, is reflected in that. The crazy things all of a sudden don't seem so crazy when you reach this point.
The situation is always hopeless, but never serious. That's what my partner, my ex-law partner used to say, and generally he was correct. I think we're getting to the point, though, John, where it's actually might be hopeless and serious at the same time, which is a bad combination of affairs. In any event, that's it for this week. Go over to John's site, dollarcollapse.com. Get your free newsletter. You can get one from us as well. John, we will talk to you in a couple of weeks.
Okay, Kerry. See ya.